Like, that's like cartoon. Like, it's not even real hammery. Like, no one's like,
you're in hell.
Literally, the flames are around us.
The room itself is kind of getting hot, a little hot in here.
They're invisible, but we do feel them.
I am sorry for my life full of misdeeds that has resulted in me being in hell.
We're sinners. What can we say?
Apologies. Well, it's Halloween, gang. You know what that means. Going to be running to Costco after work to buy chocolate.
Welcome to Roasted, a podcast hosted by the rational consumers that you learned about in economics class. I'm Kate Hatter, the Director of Digital Marketing at High 10.
And I'm David Lowe, Director of Research. Let's get into it.
Yeah. So today I wanted to bring to you a topic. Over the last week, I've probably had to fill out like 6 different forms with at least 1,000 fields alone. So I thought it would be really fun to talk about forms in general, form fields, and some issues that we commonly see with them.
I remember you mentioning this, and I think this is one of those things that is a natural discussion because we spend an intense amount of time and energy and resources building visibility for client sites. And ultimately, those things funnel to a phone call, or those things funnel to some other type of lead gen, like a form or a chat. And because of how critical that is to client business, it almost seems like we spend a lot of time and attention on the site, but then the forms can be an afterthought, or it's almost automatic. You know, the basic fields, it's on the contact page. That's about it. So I do think this is a huge topic, and there are a lot of things that we need to pay closer attention to. So looking forward to it.
Yeah. Why is a form important? Why do we look at them so often? Like you said, I think they're often forgot about, or you use the word automatic. What I often see in my team, I think often reports is actually a lack of automation and more the word default. Like there's just no thought to forms whatsoever. And forms in turn, one, have a huge impact on lead conversion. They really make your marketing smarter and sharper, and they're incredibly cost effective to not, change overnight, but also to test and really refine in order to improve the experience. So I'd say kind of like to build on that default, something that I've also seen even when we try to improve forms is, especially for industries where there's some type of like specialized CRM, to like a Service Titan or something like that. Sometimes there's this huge push to change CRMs for the better, or heck, even like you don't have a CRM, so please get a CRM and you finally do it. And then it's great. We just went through all of this work, but then we use a default form, or we just slap together everything and anything that we think we might want to get on a form.
Yeah, I think we've got to stop the madness. We have to put just as much effort and intentionality into what's going on with that particular lead generation channel as we would kind of all of our other targeting and messaging creation. So how do we get there? What do you think we ought to detail on how to bridge that gap?
Yeah, I'd say, like I said, don't use default forms. Sometimes it does make sense to have the same fields, but at least have some branding, some like unique confirmation messages. Don't just embed it onto your website. And then to use the word embed, try to embed a form if you can. What I mean by that is, as a user is scrolling on a page, they shouldn't have to leave that page or even a section in order to complete a form field. They should be able to submit that form and continue on to have a valuable experience, or even if that's easily, leaving. We have not introduced new barriers into them completing that form.
So the idea, certainly not going off site, but, maybe a contact form or an abbreviated form in line with other page content, or certainly at the footer of key pages, as opposed to a user kind of having to take the lift of navigating over to contact us from whatever content they were consuming. It's kind of the idea.
Yeah, definitely. And I wanted to ask you too about multi-step forms, kind of what that looks like for engagement and conversion rates. So just overall, what are the things that you see a lot that are
I'm really
like set you on fire?
Yeah.
And I've kind of already know this is hard, which is why I asked.
I'm really on this high horse right now about field economy. I think that's the key goal. really only asking for what you need. There's, I think we've all seen a lot of those forms where they're just totally egregious, especially for, kind of a first contact, just a billing relationship between a brand and a consumer, just really doing way too much for info that can be collected later. And secondarily, if you do have a situation where, there is a greater need for form completion, if your particular situation merits that level of detail, then staging forms that can be really critical. So if stage one of the form is just contact information, then stage two are picking up on some of those particulars, and the consumer, the user, has the opportunity to submit stage one, and you can kind of begin your intake process based on that information alone, and then potentially collect the balance during that first intro or intake conversation. I think that's a huge deal. I would almost venture a guess that if it's more than contact information and maybe one or two key questions, you ought to consider staging that field, or staging that form rather, just so you're not having someone look at what you're expecting of them. That expectation mismatch being off and someone just leaving, because then you're an absolutely score zero.
Yeah, especially if you do have like 10 or more fields. How do you determine what fields make the cut? Say we aren't going multi-step, we just need a basic contact or a general like lead gen form. What should we do?
That's a great question. And I think everyone's situation is going to be different. I think if you're honest about, is there kind of one thing, one particular piece that would automatically disqualify someone? That would be a great inclusion. I think it's going to be dependent on how intense your intake process is. If it's very intense, if there's a huge lift, or if maybe your volume's really high, and it introduces a real operational cost or operational lag, that question probably bears including. Just because you'd hate to invest so much staff time collecting data that could easily be solvable with like a radio button or something like that. But I think it is kind of some of those things where we're not maybe we're not being disciplined enough about our form creation. We're not being as intentional about our form creation as we are with the balance of the site. And then there's always that opportunity to, if it's digital, it's changeable. A great quote: "Beta is the new done." So we can leverage that, and whatever we're putting up on the form to test for a particular period of time, it's not permanent. We can give it a go for a few weeks and make changes.
Yeah, I think discipline's the perfect word. Or sometimes I think this is a little bit of a cliche in our industry, but can totally be true. I think especially for historic or to this day massive sales organizations, is that marketing and sales have friction or they completely disagree. But I think where that discipline can come into play is a collaboration of those two to really have marketing uphold the experience, but have sales determine the fields within a form.
And I think that's a really important point, is that, a lot of times our client partnerships are not, different groups within those partnerships have, different priorities. And I think that's another checkbox in favor of fielding a test for a limited amount of time and letting data be kind of the neutral arbiter of those different positions from those different entities within the client group. Ultimately, we all have fidelity to performance. So I think that's a really interesting point and a really good opportunity, again, just for the testing and the data that would result.
Yeah. I'd say even if there is friction, there's a lot to be said for simplicity. Is even start with removing one field. How would you prioritize removing that one field, even if there's disagreement? Or I think too, something else that we experience a lot is more just like the fear or the comfort of like, we've had this form forever. Everyone uses it. But do you really use the data that you receive from the form? Or is it just the discomfort of, I feel like we need to ask this information?
That's great.
So another thing that we see a lot and really drives me crazy is redundancy. So not literally having like two fields for phone number, but redundancy in the intent of information. So something that I see that really I think is hard to understand at a decision-making level is having a different field for address, having a different field for say like city, state, zip code, and then even country can be, I feel like, overkill. If you are like a single location operating within like a 30-mile satellite area, you don't need a field for country. And so I think the easy or the most simple way is just, combine, eliminate redundancy there. If the intent is I need to make sure they're in my geography or determine what sales territory to assign them to, zip code can usually, take that off the plate. The only time I really recommend having address is if there's some type of direct mail implication or there's other types of compliance information that maybe you need, or like you said, if it does help you better qualify someone for being eligible for your service, say like a financial or an insurance agency, that kind of thing. Zip code is so easy to put in, and it has direct implications for our marketing, for our ability to target, even things like location landing pages or paid media campaigns. Are there like other fields that you feel like you see a lot that should be removed, combined?
You got me sold on address, city state auto pop from Zip. I think that makes a ton of sense, and it's probably the most abused. There are so few instances. Maybe thinking about ordering pizza, not to tell him myself. But typically those will auto pop. But that's a huge opportunity. I think also related is appropriate sequencing. So in one instance, I was on the Indiana Secretary of State's website looking up some information, and if you use that business search tool, you'll type in the information like you've done it, a million times, and then you'll scroll down and hit search. And one of the maddening pieces about that site is that the CAPTCHA for that form submit is actually at the top of the form.
Interesting.
Just before the submit.
Okay.
And so, of course, you get an error, and you're, to the consumer, to the user, you've done the right thing. So
all right.
it takes some kind of ripping up and down the page to discover what you've done wrong. There isn't adequate helper text. So I think that's, alongside efficiencies like populating fields based on one piece of unique information, sequencing is super important. And just using, I think anytime you're deviating from kind of the commonly accepted norm, you can get yourself into trouble, because on sites, so much of it is about, creating an expectation and then paying off that expectation. Bounce rate is like one of the first web metrics that was super relevant to people. And bounce rate to me oftentimes is an indicator of that expectation mismatch. So on the forum, since it's on one page and it's a flow, you just want to replicate what people are used to. They've been online for their entire lives. We all have shopped at Amazon and read news websites and things like that. So there are these commonly accepted conventions that we just have to make sure that we obey.
Yeah. For CAPTCHA at the top, I've never heard of that. I don't know if that's
madness.
Like you think if someone doesn't click it first, then the bots can't like fill out. I mean, I guess it's not the end of the world, but again, the unexpected experience is like CAPTCHA, like, oh, I got to fill out something, and then I hit submit.
I think
So that's, I'm literally going to go look at that later. But and something that you said is just like required fields. So that can be frustrating. It also, like as a marketer, is frustrating when there is crucial information, or even upholding the priority of consistent information for data hygiene and analysis. If we don't have a ton of fields, then it's really not a problem to require all the fields. I would say blanket recommendation is to really require all the fields, because ideally, why have the fields on your form if they're not a requirement for better experience for your customer, better experience for your sales team to close that deal a little bit easier, or to make your marketing smarter?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think anytime you set a requirement like that, I think you also have to pay off assisting the user with completing that experience. So to have a required field, or to have something and not have like helper text on a submission failure,
like what
you owe it to the user. If you are making this requirement or this greater than ask of them, that you kind of respond in kind and help them, rather than just saying, form submit failure and kind of having them, have to rip up and down the page to figure out what's going on. So makes sense.
Yeah. Or as you said, expected experience is not necessarily your experience. And what I love working about your team
Great point.
is you really, you're sitting in the room and you are really championing the user, and that maybe you have a little mythology about what you think users expect of you. And that's not necessarily true, especially if you're kind of like dying on this hill where, oh my gosh, we're leaking leads, or our phone call hasn't been ringing as it once was. This form used to be the number one contributor of all of our qualified leads, and we just have totally tanked this year. Is asking the right questions to determine, why that is important. And I think like a lot of our podcasts, you just have to be honest with yourself about those answers.
The hardest thing in life, but also the most rewarding.
Exactly. Yeah.
Big thing on mythology, but yeah. Okay. So we've covered a lot of ground already on forums. What else do you think is out there that's worth exploring?
Yeah. So I just want to talk about solutions. I think we've thrown some really great tips out there. Something that we haven't gotten to specifically is session recording. So you had used metrics, say like a bounce rate or engagement rates. Typically we get this from Google Analytics 4, but typically that's not enough if we sense friction and we're still not seeing the results that we need to be successful to reach our goals with forms. Session recording, are there any other tips or solutions that you think are, generally great if we're looking to change?
I'm always going to be a fierce advocate for that. I think the best research oftentimes is a blend of qual and quant, and fundamentally, clickstream tools like GA4, that's going to give you a table of numbers, and that's your performance. And the table of numbers, there are just inherent limitations with that. So it doesn't scale. It's harder. It's potentially a little bit more time consuming to review session recording videos, but you're just going to see that friction in real time that you would never be able to pick up from the metrics available in GA4. So I remember one time earlier in my career, it was a form to get a coupon for something, and the terms and conditions on this form were listed before the submit button. And our conversion rate was okay. It wasn't stellar, but I had this nagging feeling that inserting this terms language before the submit was just a miss. And we installed session recording, and we discovered that, for whatever reason, this block of text had kind of what was presumably kind of a scary legalese phrase. And you could literally see the cursor highlight or hover over that phrase, and then, the session would end. So it was clear, if there's an opportunity, if legal or compliance is amenable to it, let's put those terms behind a link or something like that, or relocate elsewhere on the page, just figure out some other solution. And fortunately, we did that. It was okay with legal. We got that terms language behind the link, and conversion rate improved. Having them narrate the experience, I think, can be helpful. That's the piece that's generally missing with session recording, is that you have to make inferences based on the cursor movement or the finger touches on mobile screens. So that all of those are opportunities to optimize forms and really coming out part of the site absent offsite links.
Yeah. So we've talked a lot about forms. I'd say to wrap things, really, marketing should uphold the experience. Sales needs to determine the form itself, would be my recommendation, my theme for this episode. We've talked so much about forms today. What's like the one thing that really sets you on fire when it comes to forms?
I'm clearly stuck on it, but I have to go with an out of sequence element or an kind of an unhelpful helper text. That out of sequence captcha is just truly this is totally wild. Why that would happen. I would love to talk to the internal team to figure out what drove that decision. But that's definitely it for me. What about you?
Yeah, I'd say if I like just the scan test, if I scan through, especially on mobile, like I'm not even reading the fields, And if I'm just like, this is so long, I don't even want to read or fill it out. Like you gotta tighten up that list. Or like on mobile, like I get frustrated, even if I have to scroll. Like if a form isn't small enough that I could just beep boop, click clack, like fill it out and submit and keep going on my way. That's what feels like the biggest missed opportunity for me.
In session recording, I think that is some of the, again, there is some inference, but the rage click is the classic symptom. The U-turn is a classic symptom, but I think also it's the kind of polite scroll downward and then the rip up. That is almost exactly what you're describing.
Right.
Where the rip is the nope. You can see it kind of happening. So that's good stuff. Did we want to talk about what happens after forms are submitted, or do we want to keep that for another day?
I'd say like that has to be its own episode because you say that I'm like, all right, we need to talk another 30 minutes. So let's definitely like pause. We'll add that to the list. But ultimately, hope that these tips are helpful in simplifying your forms. As always, if you need assistance simplifying your forms, please reach out to us or visit our website at hightondigital.com. Please like, subscribe, and share. Can't wait to shop your all's forms, and hopefully we don't have any of those rage clicks or quick swipes up.
Good deal. Thanks.
Ready to get real results? Visit hightondigital.com.